Welcome to Inner Peace with Dr. Reese, a program that can help you become liberated in the modern world. Now, here's your host, Dr. Kevin W. Reese.
Have you ever thought about living in a van? Maybe not, huh? I have. I've talked about it on the podcast before. It's a new way to still be in society, but not be of society. Van life brings a certain freedom to your life. Welcome to episode number 37. Today I have Bob Wells on the Peace Pod, and he is one of the leaders of the van life movement. He has an exceptional following on YouTube. When I found his page, I binge watched and watched video after video and learned so much about this new phenomenon called van life. Bob is a true expert of van life. He's been living in a van for about 25 years. And now he's a teacher of it. He has his website, his YouTube channel. He even has a once-a-year conference that he does called the RTR, where people from all over the country drive in with their vans and RVs, and everyone gets together, and he provides education and camaraderie. And he also has a nonprofit organization where he helps people get off the ground in their van life. Sometimes they even give away vans. This gentleman is doing great things in the van life movement, helping people, and it's a pleasure to talk with him on the Peace Pod. Of course, we're going to talk about the basics of van life, what it's like, how do you get started, where do you park, what's the lifestyle, how do you make money. But you know, Bob is a very introspective guy, and a lot of the topics that are discussed on this podcast all the time are going to be discussed with Bob. We got to talk about death. We got to talk about spirituality. And how about the state of the world and where it's going? If you've already met Bob or follow him on YouTube, then you're about to get to know him a lot better over the next hour and 20 minutes. So strap on your seatbelt and let's take a ride. All right, Bob, welcome to the Peace Pod.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
So for someone that's been living in a van for over 20 years, how much freedom would you say it provides someone? How much freedom has it provided you?
I would say it's provided me with a lot of freedom. When we think about what freedom is, most people don't give it much thought. But to me, the ultimate act of freedom is the ability to choose what I am going to do at this moment. And then a free person has the maximum ability to choose at this moment, I will do this because this is what I want to do. Mm. And not many of us have much freedom.
No.
The average working person, I worked all my life. I went to work, 40 hours a week, just like everyone else. And I was fortunate. I was at a time when I could get a pension, and now I've got my pension. I'm in my golden years. I don't, nearly all of my moments of my day, I can think to myself, I can do what I want to do right now. Mm. So, and of course, I look back on my past life, my regular working life, and I had very, very few moments like that. They were rare.
Yeah, it seems like a tremendous amount of freedom, but you know what? It seems like you have sacrificed a lot of your freedom because now you're a teacher of this and you have responsibility with your YouTube channel and your website and your nonprofit organization, right? So you've kind of given away a little bit of your freedom, haven't you?
And so I've lost an enormous amount of freedom. Most of my day's decisions today are made by my desire to build what I'm building. So I'm here at 11 o'clock with you, not because this is my favorite place, although I'm happy to be here, but because I have accepted a responsibility.
Right.
And so, am I free when I made that choice? Yes, I'm doing exactly what I wanted to do.
Right. Yeah, you even have an assistant. I mean, how many people in a van have an assistant?
Yeah, I would think that's kind of unusual.
Yeah, no, I mean, you have taken on a responsibility, and you're an entrepreneur in your own right, because the YouTube page is, it's blown up, as we say in the streets. It's doing
Yeah.
well. And you're educating people. I was fascinated with van life. I mean, when I ran into your page originally, I binge watched like most people do. And I identified with it immediately because I am familiar with ashrams and monasteries. And when somebody goes and lives a spiritual life at an ashram or a monastery, it's about simplicity. And when I saw van life, I said, that's really Zen. That's really simple. Now, there might be a few little headaches, right? You got to get fuel. You got to make sure the van is well taken care of. But there's something Zen about it. There's something very present moment about it, wouldn't you say?
I would say very much so. Exactly how I see it. And probably one of the questions I get most, I get many of the same questions. How do you go to the bathroom? The nuts and bolts of how you do this. But when they get beyond the nuts and the bolts of how you would live in a van, one of the big things and big fears is, what will I do with myself all day? Will I be bored out of my mind? And that is the civilized mindset of, I have to be productive at all times. I must be distracted and entertained at all times. I can't have a moment where I just sit down and listen to my own head and just do nothing. That is a terrifying thought for the majority of Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you are confronted with that in the life that I promote. That if you come out here and you wake up one morning and you have nothing to do. You do that day exactly what you want to do. Everything takes a little longer, so you'll be busy, but you'll just go for a walk. Most of us end up going for walks. I knew a guy who would just, he'd been a truck driver all his life, go, just like all of us. He'd run his own trucking into business. And he came out here and he just slowly learned to wake up, go outside, make a cup of coffee, and just sit in his chair for hours and watch nature move. And
Beautiful.
he would never say it, but that was one of the most Zen things I've ever seen. He could just sit there and be. It's the greatest fear that most of us had, that what will I do with my time? What will I do with my brain?
Mm-hmm.
And yet it turns into mostly the greatest joy we have.
That's right.
I think
That's right. People are afraid to be alone, but the English language it's one of the last languages that was created. And they put a lot of thought into it. Alone is all one. So, there's something to be said about being alone.
yes. And we just have to, we in our society, our private thoughts are so, for the most part, so unhealthy and unhappy that we have to be distracted away from them all the time.
Right.
So it's a major mindset change, paradigm shift, if you can just learn to be alone with your own thoughts. It's terrifying. It's one of the things I warn people about. When you come out here, you're going to face certain things. And one of the big ones is this mindset shift. It will be a traumatic thing and a very difficult thing for many people. The old idea that you hear all the time that men retire and they're dead within years, it's that. They can't ever let go of the busyness of their mind, and they can't fill it. And it's so terrifying. I think it kills them. I really do.
Yeah. So what you're saying is van life is not for everyone.
I believe it is for every human being. But a few of us are so traumatized by our civilized way of life, they cannot adapt back to a proper and correct and normal human way of living.
Right. So obviously there's people, my audience is listening, and they're like, probably banging on their table. Get to the nuts and bolts. How do you go to the bathroom? How do you live?
Okay.
So let's go. Let's use your story as example. Let's go back. Your first van was a box truck, correct?
Correct. Yes.
So just to give the audience a visual, box truck, like a moving truck, a U-Haul, something to that effect.
It had a van nose, just like any van nose, and you see these running around the streets all the time.
Right.
And then it had a box on the back, and mine was literally 8 foot by 12 foot by about 7 foot tall on the inside. So imagine a room. I mean, that's a small room in a house. That might be a bathroom in someone's house,
right.
With a low ceiling. So 12 by 8 by 7 foot tall, and that was my home.
And this is the 90s, right?
1995, I moved into that van.
Okay. What made you wake up one day and say, I'm going to move into that? And what gave you the idea to do that?
Well, I had always been a backpacker. And so traveling and camping with nothing had always been a normal thought to me. And when I was just a young man, one summer I delivered pianos, and that was the first. And we had a box truck exactly like the one I ended up in. And so I remember being with the guys and us having discussions about converting it to a camper. I lived in Alaska all my life, and camping is the normal thing. Going fishing, everyone I knew went fishing.
Right.
And so you'd rush down to the river on your days off and set up camp. And I said, wouldn't it be great just to have, if you converted this van into a camper, just put in a cot and a little table to cook on and in your cooler, and it'd be a great camper. And we all just thought that was a wonderful idea. So I went through a divorce in 1995. That's how I know the year. And when the divorce was over, I could no longer afford to pay for two households. And essentially that's what you're doing. You're going from one household to two, and I could no longer do that. And so I needed a way to live very cheaply, and the van provided that. I did in this story, I drove to work every day, and I drove past this lot. I don't remember what it was. And it was a business, and they used it as a delivery van. They had a for sale sign on it.
Mm.
And I drove by it, and I started driving to and from work by it, and I thought, I could live in that. Why couldn't I live in that? And I finally thought, I'll stop. I stopped one day on the way to work. It was cheap. He said it was great. They'd taken great mechanical care of it, but it was kind of old and beat up and rusty, and the boss was ashamed of it and said, get rid of it. And I got it for $1,500. And that night I threw down a sleeping pad and a sleeping bag, and I was home.
Did you end up insulating it?
Oh yeah. I live in Alaska, and 30 below was routine in the winter.
Right.
And so, yeah, insulation was critical. Over a period of time, like everyone, how did you do this? How do you do that? You just figure it out over a period of time. And having been a backpacker, compared to living off a backpack, it was an enormous amount of room.
Yeah.
And that's one way I would convey to your audience. It's a rolling steel tent.
That's right.
If you look at it that way, or another way to look at it is 150 years ago, our ancestors, who we admire tremendously, crossed the plains in wagons, covered wagons. Think of it as a covered wagon. Think of me and yourself as a person who's now going to live for the next 6 months or 8 months or however long it took, I don't even know, long time, to cross the prairie in a prairie schooner.
Right. So you're living in a box truck. I've thought about a box truck myself, and eventually you end up in just a regular white Chevy van, right?
It's been numerous iterations of vehicles. My next one, because I lived in Alaska, was a 4-wheel drive pickup with a very tall shell.
Wow.
That was my next home. I lived in that for about 3 years.
Wow. And then eventually into the Chevy van.
Right. In
the classic white van that people see all over society.
Right. Yes. I lived in one of those, just a regular one, for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years. And then it was pretty well worn out. I gave it away to someone else and bought a pretty new one. What I'm in now is a 2015. It's just a white cargo van. And I put a high top. You've seen vans with high tops if they're carrying passengers. For business, they usually have high tops, and there are companies that will install high tops, and I pay the company to put on a high top.
Somebody must be wondering right now, why a van? Why take a van and convert it instead of just going and buying an RV?
Okay, that's a great question. In all of life, your whole life comes down to a balancing act between comfort and mobility. So most of your audience lives in apartments or homes they own. And so they have an enormous amount of comfort, but they have zero mobility. You're not moving that home. If you decide you're going to move, that becomes an enormous chore. Yeah, you can get in your car and move around, but you're coming home to that home. And even if you're in a unique position where you can travel a lot, that's unique. That's not the norm. You've lost your potential, and the house steals from you your potential of mobility because you got to pay for it.
That's right.
You got to go to a job. You got to pay for it. And a few don't have to, but they're the rare ones. So you give up mobility for comfort. Well, if you decide I'm going to live on wheels, every choice offers that exact choice. If I want to be in an RV, I get a lot of comfort, but I give up a lot of mobility. How do I lose mobility? Well, maybe I'll get 5 miles to the gallon. I got to be able to pay for the gas to drive 1,000 miles. That's a lot of money. And if I don't have that money, then I've lost that ability just to drive across the country because I want to. You can't take them much into the back country. They're too big.
Right.
And you just can't take them. I routinely go places where you wouldn't even think about going in an RV.
Right.
They're hard to drive around the city. They're hard to park in the city. I mean, if you've got a 30-foot RV, you get an enormous amount of comfort. But go park that downtown New York and tell me how that went for you.
No
You've
stealth.
You've lost the mobility that I have in a regular old van. They're driving around every city. They're driving around back countries, country roads. And so there's always, and the gas mileage is really a big part of it. And so for some people, a minivan is a better choice. You get most of the comfort, not all, but you can get into the mid 20s or higher in miles per gallon. So that's a good choice too. Everyone has to make their choice. I think the van is the very best choice of comfort and mobility. It's adequate amount of comfort, not a lot, but adequate, and adequate amount of mobility. Not like a Jeep, but pretty darn good.
Yeah, and so your lifestyle, if I'm not mistaken, you're on the West Coast, right?
Correct.
So you go to desert area for winter, right?
Correct.
And then you go to mountain area for summer, right?
Exactly.
Okay, please explain that to the audience.
It's commonly called being a snowbird, and we do exactly what wild creatures have done since there have been wild creatures. We follow the weather. And so if the weather is good in one place, we migrate to there. And when the weather turns bad there, and so right now I'm in the desert, it's about 75 degrees. Where I am gets about 300 days of sunshine a year. I like that. I like seeing the sun. And I like being at about 75 degrees. But I bet a lot of your audience is in a very cold place and would think, oh, I could live with 75 and sun. So we go to where the best weather is. And then in the winter, and that's for us, that's the desert Southwest. For your East Coast audience, maybe it would be Florida. South Florida is very warm. And for your Midwest audience, it could be either. You can go the distances, but it might be Texas. South Texas on the Gulf Coast is a destination for a lot of us. It's pretty warm there too. So we just travel with the weather. It turns out the laws of physics dictate that for every 1,000 feet in elevation you gain, you're going to drop about 3.5 degrees of temperature. So if you go up to 10,000 feet, you've dropped 35 degrees. So if it's 135 in Phoenix, which it doesn't get, but let's just say it is, it will be 100 at 10,000 feet. And so you get much cooler. Or more realistically, if it's 110 in Phoenix, it's going to be 85 at 10,000 feet. So we look for elevation more than we look for north.
And a lot of people do city parking. They do stealth mode. They park in the back of a hotel or they park on a city street. It sounds like that's what you did in the beginning, and you've evolved to where you are now.
Correct. So I parked on the streets of Anchorage, literally, and went to a gym every morning. And that's how I took a shower and got healthier. And I learned to cook inside the van just with a cook stove, like I would if I were backpacking. And that we call that stealth because the goal is to not deceive, although in a sense I guess it is, but just not to draw attention. If you don't bother people, most people won't bother you.
No.
So you keep your van clean. You don't ever leave trash. You don't make a mess. You don't bother anyone. They won't bother you. That's the idea.
Where are some places someone could stealth park if they were in a van in a city type environment?
I was actually worked in the grocery business all my life. I was a union clerk. I stocked grocery shelves. And so I personally believe that most 24-hour grocery stores are your first choice. First, there are employees in there. So there's a bunch of people in the parking lot. There are people coming and going. In fact, cops are in and out of 24-hour grocery stores all the time. They want to get a coffee or a donut and a bite to eat. So there's a lot of traffic. You can blend in. People won't know if you're an employee or not. I think a 24-hour grocery store is your best choice. And then for some people, they like areas with apartment complexes because there's all these sprawling parking. You always usually have an assigned parking, but not enough. So there's people parked everywhere, and you never know who's where, and you just blend in. You get a little further away, so you're not stealing their parking spots, but you blend in, and no one knows who you are or what you're doing there. Those are two good ones.
How about a commuter lot?
That would depend on the city, and it would
Right.
depend on the lot. Sometimes they're locked, sometimes they're patrolled, sometimes they'll put up signs saying no overnight parking. It can work. It just depends on the individual city.
Right. Okay. How about hotels?
A surprising number of hotels have security watching the parking lot. What can work, and what I have done numerous times, is if you can find a motel that is joined to like a Denny's, a 24-hour Denny's restaurant chain. And so you could be in between them, and no one would know if you were in working at the Denny's, in eating breakfast at the Denny's, or in the motel. So in other words, you're just thinking, how can I not draw any attention, the least amount of attention to myself?
Right.
And that's a good one because you could be in either place. And you can go in and get Denny's and get Wi-Fi and buy a cup of coffee and a piece of pie. That's nice too. And use their bathroom.
You have a chart on your website, rvliving.com, that someone could live in their van for $500 a month or $1,000 a month, and then you have it all broken down.
And I do say on there, it is a very frugal life at $500 a month.
Right.
You are in survival mode in this country. The problem in this country is we have become a very low wage, very high cost of housing nation. And many people are being trapped in that. So they may be making a pretty good wage, but they're comparatively what it used to be. But their cost of housing has skyrocketed so much, and cost of healthcare and other things are still up. And they can't afford to live. What I'm finding a lot in my community is particularly women who are on retirement age, on Social Security, and when they were young girls. If you're 60 or 70 now, when you were a young girl, you were told to stay home, have kids, get married, and take care of the kids. And so they did. And because at that time, so we're talking 50 years ago, there were no jobs for women. It was discouraged. The jobs that were there were not very good jobs. They didn't pay much. They still don't. They always, even today, they have this huge wage disparity. And so what happens is husband dies along the road. It's 50 years later. It's time to retire. They had been promised if they did their part, they would be taken care of. Right. Now it's time to be taken care of. And so husband has died or replaced them with a better model. And they go to draw their Social Security. They don't have much because they didn't work that much. And when they worked, it was low wage jobs. So they end up on between $500 and $1,000 a month on Social Security. And you cannot live in this country on $500 or $1,000 and be in a house.
Right.
If you can, you're eating dog food. I mean, literally, you're eating dog food. And every month you're deciding, will I eat or will I pay for electricity for next month? And the idea, well, now I need to go to a doctor and get these prescriptions filled. That idea is out, because if you're not Medicare yet, or if you can't afford the extra that all the other plans cost, you're not going to go get the medicine. You're doing without, because you have to have a place to live. The one thing you do not want to be in this country is living in a cardboard box under a bridge.
Right.
And that's a lot of what a lot of seniors are facing.
Right.
Live in a cardboard box under a bridge, or eat, or get the medicine that will keep me alive. It's a sad and pathetic state, but it is very, very real.
Right.
The average Social Security is $1,400. And so that means a huge chunk of them are under $1,000 a month, and you can't live on $1,000 a month. And in fact, I just saw a survey that said 25% of Americans do not have a penny saved towards retirement today, right now. And over 50% couldn't put $1,000 together for an emergency. So, this is going to continue. The next generation is going to come to retirement age with no money in the bank, Social Security only, and that's not a livable wage. It's not, you can't live on it. So, all that to say, there are a lot of people who are making between $500 and $1,000 a month. And while you cannot possibly thrive, maybe you could survive living in a house, but that's all. You can't thrive on that wage. You can thrive if you can own a good minivan, and you can buy a good minivan for $3,000 and turn it into a nice little home for perhaps just a couple hundred. You can thrive and not just survive. At the end of the month, you will have a bit of money left. You will have traveled in that month. When you buy gas, you have to move the way we do this on public land every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks you're going to move, and you're going to see the country, and you're going to not just survive, you're going to thrive. You eliminate the cost of housing, you can live surprisingly cheap still in this country.
Sure. You mentioned the minivan. It's smaller than what you're in, but it's an option for people who don't have enough money.
The van life has become so popular that finding a good van is very difficult and expensive. And so minivans are plentiful. And so I do recommend minivans. You do give up some comfort. You gain some mobility. And
great gas mileage.
Great gas mileage. I mean, you're getting into the mid-20s is pretty easy on a minivan.
Wow. I know so many people who are house poor because we've been socially engineered to buy a house. You're in an apartment, you don't own it, right? It's like it's a programming to buy a house, and then somebody may buy a house and it might cost them $1,500 and they only make $1,800, and then they only got a few hundred left over for food and whatever. So there's a lot of house poor people out there, Bob, and van life is a way to break that pattern.
Right. I think what happened, I'm sure you're familiar with the hashtag van life movement, which is very, very strong among the young, because, and I think it's primarily because of 2008, when it became just starkly evident that the economy of our country has drastically changed. The idea, here they saw all these people who had worked all their life for a pension, and it was just stolen from them. Right. The company went to court, and their pensions just disappeared. The company they had worked for all thetheir lives, 20, 30 years, all of a sudden they had no pension, they had no job, they had nothing, zero. Then they lost their house, and they literally had zero. They were in a cardboard box. And so I think that was, and the one thing that society has always said is, buy a house, upgrade, keep buying bigger, better houses. When you get older, you'll have a pension. We'll take care of you. That's our promise. And you'll have Social Security, and you'll sell the house, and you'll buy a smaller one, pay cash. You won't have to pay a house payment. You're going to have a great old age, golden years. Well, it became very, very evident in 2008 that that was a hollow promise. It had been true for the boomer generation. It really was. It was true for my generation. That came true for me. I don't believe it's going to come true for any more generations ever again. I don't know what the future is for our economy, but it's not that. It's not the golden years. Staying at one company for life, keep upgrading houses, everything will be golden. That's no longer true. And I think anybody with common sense can see that.
Right. How about heat? How would someone in van life heat themselves? There's a few options, right?
There are some people that can't be a snowbird. I kept working for 6 years after I started living in a van, so I couldn't be a snowbird. I had to stay there. My kids were there, and I wasn't leaving where my kids were, so I was locked into Anchorage, Alaska. So heat was a big, big issue. But now that I'm retired and older, and I'm a snowbird, so I go to the desert where it's mostly warm. There are cold nights. The desert can have surprisingly cold nights. And there are transition seasons. So the desert, there's an example, is in May, the desert might be into the mid-90s and pretty hot, pretty uncomfortable. And I'll move to the mountains and it'll snow. So there's a transition period where you're going to run into some unpleasant weather, either too hot or too cold. And so you do need to be able to cope with heat and cold. With heat is easy. You can buy a little portable propane heater that's designed to be used indoor. They're safe indoor. The one most of us use, there are two brands, Mr. Heater, Buddy heaters. And that's a very common one. A lot of us use those. Puts out a lot of heat, will heat a van just instantly, really, really warm. And the other one is made by a company called Olympian. They're true catalytic heaters. And I'm a big fan of those, but they will both work.
I'm seeing a lot of Chinese diesel heaters now too.
And they're superb. They're about $1,000. And so that's so much that most of us can't really afford them. They're vented, so they're going to be inherently a little safer. There's less risk. And they're thermostat. They just, come on, go off. And so, yeah, those are real popular. In fact, I know some people, and either gas or diesel, you can tap right into your gas tank.
So, Bob, you're in your 60s, right?
64, almost 65.
Okay. So your children must be in their 30s?
Yes.
How do they feel that dad's been in a van for the last 20 something years?
Well, they kind of grew up with it. My son, I think he's amused by my notoriety. I don't know how else to say that. Hopefully he's just amused by it. I send it, every time I'm in any kind of media article, I send it to him and show off. Of course, my ego's as big as anybody's.
Yeah.
And so I sent it to him and he's amused by it. And, but when we were divorced when he was 6. And so for the next 6 years, when he came to visit me in a van.
Right.
And so he was in the van, in and out of the van, with me. And I made sure he was comfortable. I got him, this was back in the tube TV days. I had a 32-inch tube TV in my box van. And I hooked up we had the very first generation of PlayStation and Nintendos. And so he would come home from school and play Nintendo just like all of his friends and PlayStation. So yeah, he grew up with it. And it kind of has given him, I don't know if you're familiar with something called the FIRE movement. That stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early, Mr. Money Mustache.
Yeah.
And actually, in a way, that's exactly what I'm saying. Live really frugally, gain your independence, financially independent. And in a really primitive sense, that's exactly what I'm teaching. Just exactly what Mr. Money Mustache teaches. Right. Get a job, save all you can, have a savings, and then live on the savings and be financially independent.
And some van lifers will get a job somewhere they're not attached to it, and they'll work for 2-3 months, right? Save the money, and then they don't have to work for the next however many months.
Exactly. It depends on what your skill set is. If you have the skill set, well, the idea behind FIRE, Financial Independence, Retire Early, is that if you have the skill set and you can bring in the money and save enough, you work till you're 30 or 40, and then you never work again. That's retire early. And it's completely realistic. I know a guy who was worked for one of the big tech companies in San Francisco, writing code, has probably $500,000 in the bank, now lives in a Subaru Forester, and will never have to work again. If he wants to, he can. That's financial independence. It's his choice. Maybe he wants to work. Maybe he's got a brilliant idea and he just enjoys creating a business, and so he'll create a business, and that he'll contribute in that way. It's his choice. But he lives in a van, and if he wants to go rock climbing up in Montana, he goes. And if he wants to go to Baja and surf, he goes there. He lives so cheaply, he can live on his savings and never have to think about money again.
Right.
And thrive and flourish in the way he wants to.
Right. Yeah, there's so many options. And again, I sort of automatically correlate it to ashrams and monasteries. It's slightly different, but there's a lot of similarities there, because if you go to an ashram or a monastery, you don't need any money. They give you room and board to follow their lifestyle, and maybe you work in the kitchen or you do housekeeping. This is very similar because you can go work at a campground for a few months, right?
Right.
Break some money, live in your van. I've met a lot of people at ashrams, and the stories are unbelievable. One guy told me about this place that he worked at in Oregon. It was a retreat center. He worked there for an entire year, and they paid him plus room and board. So my thought was, oh my gosh, well, if you took the Bob Wells van life philosophy and you combine that with that, there's something there.
If they paid him a wage and room and board, and he did it for a year, he could probably take 2 or 3 years and not work, living in a van.
Yeah.
And then his life would be 100% his.
Right.
Every day, every choice would be the one he wanted, whatever it was.
Right. And I've also met people at ashrams that bounce from ashram to ashram to ashram. Some of them, they bring a tent and they sleep out in the tent in the summer months. And that's how they live their life. And if they had a van, if they were doing van life, they could take that to a whole other level.
It's just a rolling steel tent. That really is the way to look at van living. It's a rolling steel tent.
That's right.
You're young. You probably don't remember when it was out. The TV series Kung Fu.
I know of it.
You know of it. You're too young to have seen it. Well, it was a big hit, and it was the idea. I think he was half American, half Chinese, and he had grown up with the Kung Fu philosophy, and a monk. He was a monk in a temple, and it shows his growing up. And remember this grasshopper, you always had those scenes. And then when he got old, he came back to America, and he walked around on nothing and did good. And there was a huge popular hit. And that concept of just being absolutely free and going around and doing good, meeting people and making connections, and everywhere I went, I did good. People were glad I had come. That lives large in the human heart. It's the normal, natural way to be a human being. Now, let me give you some evidence. That's a bold statement to say. For the first 2 million years of Homo sapiens and pre-Homo sapiens, that's the way every single one of us lived. We lived in a small community, and the community lived and died by the contribution of each one. We were in complete cooperation. If you said, where is the best way to store excess food? The answer was always in my neighbor's stomach. Right. Because the next day when I needed him, he was healthy and strong and was there for me. And that is, so this being deeply connected to each other, traveling around, taking care of each other, living in cooperation. The evolutionary biologists call it the environment of evolutionary adaptedness. This is the environment and the way of life our species evolved to live. And the more we live away from that, the unhealthier we are, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And we live in a society that's tremendously unhealthy, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, because we have drifted so far from the 2 million years of evolution. And I believe intelligent design that created us to be that way. But whether you do or not, whether you believe in science or evolutionary or intelligent design, doesn't matter, they both agree. That's the way humans should behave. That connected, deeply connected, generous, cooperative spirit.
Absolutely. I've heard you say on a video once that you made death your best friend.
Yes.
Death is a very, very big topic on this podcast. I talk about it all the time. I truly, truly feel that it's the most important event of our life. And when you understand death and you can get close to it, it helps you live.
Yes.
How have you made death your best friend?
I ponder it. I literally ponder it. I meditate on it. When we talked about freedom, and first and foremost, I think freedom is that ability to choose today, but it goes beyond my actual, natural body's ability to choose. We all have points in our lives. We think to ourselves, why am I doing this? I don't even want to do this. Why do I do the things I don't want to do?
Right.
And why don't I do the things I do want to do? So freedom is as much an internal, spiritual, emotional, intellectual exercise as it is an outside exercise. And so I give a lot of thought. I have pretty much devoted my life to understanding what does it mean to be free spiritually, emotionally, and intellectually. And I believe first and foremost is embracing death and befriending death. And so I'm not a very smart guy. So I try to stand on the shoulders of really, really smart guys. And so I think particularly back to the Stoics and Buddhists, Buddha himself.
Yes.
And one of the things that Buddha did, now I'm not a Buddhist, but one of the things that Buddha did was they actually would go to graveyards and dig up graves and sit around and ponder that dead body.
Yes.
And you can't see it, but I've got a skull not very far from me. And the Stoics are another group that I tremendously admire. I see so much commonality between the Stoics and the Buddha.
Yeah.
And the Stoics encouraged people who followed that philosophy to do negative meditations, ponder the bad things in your life. In fact, there's a famous quote in, I think it's Epictetus, who was a big one, or Marcus Aurelius, I'm not sure, where he talks about pondering your child's death. When you get up in the morning and you hug and hold your child, ponder their death, and then hold that close and think to yourself, this child is going to die. I'm going to lose them, or I'm going to die. I'd better take this moment and be here with this child.
Yeah, man. Everything is temporary. That's one of the major teachings in Buddhism, Taoism, pretty much all the Eastern cultures. This is temporary. Everything is temporary. Your money, your life, your cars, even your respectability. It's all temporary, and it could all be gone the snap of the fingers.
I'm not a fan of our current positivity movement. I think that I think it's a denial of life.
Yes.
And they're all going to tell me how crazy I am. You want me to meditate on death? And yes, I do.
Yes.
I think
Yes.
if you make death your best friend,
you learn how to live.
You learn how you won't until. I am an enormous fan of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I think she may be one of the wisest humans who ever lived, because she spent her whole life holding the hand of the dying, and there is wisdom in that woman.
Yes, and Ram Dass, who just passed away a few weeks ago, was also a part of that movement. I was inspired by that movement as well. I immediately signed up to visit hospice people. So just get as close to it as you can, because
Yes.
it's going to happen to you. It just happened to Kobe Bryant
Right.
in a helicopter crash with his 13-year-old daughter. It's like it can happen if a mega athlete, if it can happen to a mega athlete, it can happen to any of us at any time.
Right.
And I love how you brought up the Buddhist philosophies, the Taoist philosophies as well, similar. The Eastern philosophy in general.
Yes.
Some people look at it as negative. They look at it as depressing,
Hmm.
but they're just looking at it the wrong way, you know?
Yes. They're not seeing the enormous positive benefit of knowing I don't have tomorrow.
That's right.
I don't have tomorrow. That's just tomorrow is the illusion.
Right.
This is the only reality.
That's right. So how did you, because I've heard you also mention that you got into Taoism and Zen.
My spiritual background is traditional Christian. My parents were. My mom was a Baptist. I went to Baptist church, and so later on, when I was a teenager, I got saved and did the traditional Christian thing a lot, a very long time with all of my heart. I'd like to think I did it with all my heart. It didn't work out so well for me. And so when I got older, especially when I went through my divorce, it was a real hitting bottom for me. And the church I was going to was actually into the 12 steps. And I was at a real bottom, really bad spot in my life. And my pastor, who was a very great, wise man, said, "Why don't you go talk to so-and-so, who was was an addict, was a drunk,
Mm.
and a real low bottom drunk, in and out of mental institutions and jails.
Mm.
And why don't you talk to him about the 12 steps and AA?" So I went and talked to him, and it all made sense to me. And I'd never been drunk once in my life. I've never used an illegal drug. Those things don't apply to me.
Mm.
But I'm a very addictive person, and so the question of how can I be free of the demands of my heart, how can I actually find true spiritual freedom, was an incredibly important question to me. So I started going to AA meetings with him. Again, now I've never been drunk in my life. I sat down at my first AA meeting and I knew I was home. These were my people. This was the only place on this planet and for the very first time in my life, I belonged.
Mm.
So I kept going to AA meetings because I belonged. I wasn't a drunk. I couldn't be a member. The only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking, and I didn't have it.
And their philosophy is the higher power, right?
It is. It's the 12 steps. One day at a time.
Right.
That is a hardcore. The only way you can stop drinking is one day at a time, and really the only way you can stop drinking, or whatever your addiction is. Or maybe it's overworking. Maybe it's whatever it is. Maybe it's gambling. Maybe it's eating. For lots of us, it's eating. For huge majority of us, it's shopping. The only way you can stop doing those things, eating and shopping, is through finding a higher power. And so there was a method. The 12 steps are simply an organized plan, a spiritual kit that you pick up and you follow the plan, and miracles happen. And one day you realize, I've stopped shopping, I've stopped drinking, I've stopped drugging, I've stopped eating compulsively. And so for the next 2 years, I went to probably 2 or 3 meetings every single day. I worked the steps. Whatever my sponsor said, I did, and my life changed.
Mm.
And there's an incredible correlation between the principles of Zen and Taoism, the Stoics, and the 12 steps. So that's my background.
Okay.
You have to have a higher power to adequately work the steps. The miracle occurs only when there's a higher power. But it's for each person to determine for themselves who their higher power was. Well, I'd been a Christian all my life, and my higher power was Jesus. And that had not worked for me in any way, shape, or form. I had to find a higher power. And so I began a study of all the world's religions. I said, okay, I'm just going to look around. In AA, they say, the only thing you have to know about a God is there is a God, and you're not it. And those are the two hardest things you can ever really believe. I'm not really God. and I'm not really fit to direct my life. And that's the fundamental principle of AA. You need a manager. Your life has become completely unmanageable, and you need a good manager. You got to fire the one you've got, which is you, and get a good one. And so you start looking for one. And I was on a search for one. And from that day to this, finding the right manager and making the right manager in charge of my life is everything I do. And making sure that today, at this moment, that manager is in charge and not me. Religious ideas that I spoke to me were primarily Zen, Taoism, as you mentioned, and Native American. And I see the tremendous similarity. And then philosophically, Stoicism.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's.
And I see them all really blending together. And I see death in the Native American spirituality as varied as it is. A saying you will hear all the time among Native Americans is today is a good day to die. You live every day ready to die. And so that's that concept of embracing death that is a commonality.
Right. And see, now, like you just said it a few minutes ago, people are overly positive now. They're into this law of attraction stuff.
Idea behind the law of attraction. This is the fundamental idea. I know what's good for me, and I'm going to get it. And I operate under the exact opposite philosophy. I had no idea what's good for me. And I spent most of my first 40 years of my life doing everything I could get it for myself, and every action was wrong. It's the old, I think it's a Buddhist saying about the farmer. The farmer has a horse, and the horse runs away one day in China or old America. And the neighbors come and say, "Oh, your horse has run away. That was so important. No, it's such a disaster." And he says, "Well, we'll wait and see." And the next day the horse comes back, and this time he's pulling. Well, he's got a herd. Now all of a sudden he's got 100 horses.
Yeah.
Oh, and the neighbors say, "That's so wonderful. Things are so great, so great, so great." And he says, "Well, we'll wait and see how this turns out." So the next week, his son is breaking one of the horses. He breaks his leg. The neighbors come over and, "Oh, this is such a tragedy. It's so horrible. It's horrible. Your son has broke his leg. You're going to lose your farm. Everything's awful." The next day, the emperor comes around and says, takes all the young men, but he can't take their, and then they're all killed. They're all go to this big battle, and they're all killed. But his son has a broken leg and can't go. So, the moral of the story is you never know what's good for you. Shakespeare got it right. Nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. The idea that you know what's good for you and you're going to make it happen, I think that's a tragic mistake.
Well, yeah. I mean, I approached my mentor once, who was a mystic, and I asked him about the law of attraction, and he said, a lot of it, sounds good, and yeah, the universe will take care of you, this, that, and the other, but be cautious, because people are translating greediness.
Yes.
Because they're constantly they're trying to get what they want. And people do that in prayer too, a lot.
That's what most prayer is.
It's greediness.
It's all. It's pure greed. My conclusions are that most religious activities are purely selfish and greedy. At their ultimately at their core, they're about myself.
Right.
And really, the whole question to determine in life is self. It all constantly boils down to the ego and to the self, and what is it really up to at this moment? And that is the hardest question to ask honestly and really want to find an answer to, and then to find it and then to act on it in an appropriate way. But that's always the question for every, spiritually, emotionally, intellectually. That's always the question. What's really genuinely going on with my ego right now?
Mm-hmm.
And for Buddhism in particular. And this is something I admire greatly about Buddhism. It's all about the breaking down of the false self and merging into the we. And oddly enough, it's that merging into the we, I, thou, we, getting that right.
Mm-hmm.
That the 12 steps AA does. The first word of each step is we. There's no I in the steps anywhere. It's always a we. And that's when you come in and you sit down For me, it was my very first experience as a human being as a we and not an I. And I had to have more of that. And so I stayed. And it's my pursuit. Romantic relationships are I thou. And really good ones, it's 1 + 1 = 2. So you're greater than the sum of the parts. But you either bond together and merge together the I and the thou, which is what most of them do, or there's just two of you. And that's what really, ultimately, that's what nearly all marriages devolve into. We just cohabit. You want two people cohabiting.
Right.
A few good ones, they merge and in to some degree. I think my ultimate goal is 1 + 1 = 3. You're you, I'm me, but together we're some new complete entity.
Right.
This we thing. And these marriages that are virtually mystical, it's a we thing that's incomprehensible to the ego. It can't. I can understand me. I can understand you. I can't understand the we. My ego can't comprehend that. You have to experience it. And I think the pursuit of all spirituality is 1 + 1 = 3.
Well, there's also another teaching in that, I think, that we need to be comfortable with things not making sense.
Yes.
So, the lesson here is acceptance.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. You have to give up the demand that things make sense and that you be right.
Logic.
Right. You have to let it go because it doesn't work. It doesn't translate.
That's right.
I mean, we need it. We're not going to live our lives illogically, but with the big questions, the questions that form
the non-practical.
Right.
There's the practical and the non-practical.
The meaning, not the science. Science is, 1 + 1 = 2.
Right.
But the meaning of what we're studying can be 1 + 1 = 3.
That's right. It's hard to teach butterfly to a caterpillar.
Yes, that's a good saying. I like that a lot.
It's not going to make sense to everyone.
I'm here. Higher power's there. I got to go there.
Right.
What if it's not 1 + 1? What if it's 1 + 1 = 3? I'm here.
Right.
He's there. She, it. And there's something else. What if it's that something else?
Right.
Well, I think that's enlightenment. I think we just described enlightenment.
So Zen would just say, just be here now. That's all you have to do. Right. That's why Gautama the Buddha, he didn't talk about God. Not to say he didn't believe, but he didn't want to teach his people. He wanted them to drop the concept of God so that they could develop themselves internally, because people get attached to it and it becomes a greed. Like money would.
Mm-hmm.
So this goes back to what we were talking about with praying greedy, always asking, God, please give me this. Please help me with that. Please make sure so-and-so doesn't die. Right? It's like a dad. It's like if you ask your dad, can I borrow $100? Next week, can I borrow the car? Next week, can I borrow another $100? It's just constant. You're asking. The goals in the future, forget about that. Just be here now.
Yeah, actually, that's one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of the steps. The 11th step, which is coming to the end, the last 3 steps are commonly thought of as the maintenance steps. The 11th step says, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understand God, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the ability to carry it out. So the steps, built into the steps, is you don't pray for yourself. You don't come to God with greed ever.
That's right.
It's built in that the goal is conscious contact. It's 1 + 1 = 3. It's we. You can't describe conscious contact, but you know that's the goal of the Buddha. Just a conscious contact, just an awareness, a sixth sense
Yeah.
You can't even put in words. It's not a doctrine. It's not a thought.
Right.
It's not something you do. It's who you are.
The big term in Buddhism is emptiness. To empty yourself.
Yes.
And once you empty yourself, then God or universe, Tao, whatever you want to use, then it can enter you once you're empty.
Very much. Woo-wee, the non-acting, non-being.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love all those concepts. They're ones I hold to.
Yeah.
Loosely because they're unholdable. They're unformable.
Now on your YouTube channel, I have noticed that you're starting to get looser on there. You're starting to drop some stuff some wisdom that you've gained over the years. You're starting to talk about this stuff a little more, whereas before it was all van life, van life, van life.
I actually have a plan and I've had for a long time, and I've taken a few awkward steps to start a vlog. It'll just be Bob Wells vlog, and that's all it will be. It will be philosophical, Stoics. It'll be spiritual, Buddha, Tao, all these things we've discussed. It will be all these things we've discussed.
Right. Are you prepared for a little bit of pushback on that, and or some of your followers leaving? Because Christians can be great people, right? They're great, but sometimes there's an arrogance of, my God is the only way, and this is the only way, and if you don't do it, you're going to hell. Are you ready for that pushback?
Oh yeah,
You have a big following.
I do, and I've always gotten that audience, that pushback. Every so often, like you said, even now, every so often, my religious viewpoints come out, and yeah, I've had Christians write me and tell me my father is the devil, and I'm going to hell, and tell me all about Jesus. Yeah, I'm well aware that would be part of it. That's why I would do it as a separate blog. I'm going to say right in it, these are my personal opinions. If you can't stand to be around someone who has a different opinion, please don't watch. Turn me off now. Don't watch this. Why make yourself angry?
Right.
What I'm going to say is make a great majority of people unhappy. I mean, if you're an atheist, you're going to be mad. If you're a Christian, you're going to be mad.
Right.
Why put yourself through that?
Right.
But it will happen. Yes, I know. A lot of
just,
people hate me now. I mean, there's YouTube is full of people who are busily doing everything they can to tell me how wrong I am about everything and what a bad guy I am.
Yeah, well, they could also look at it as you're teaching people to sell their house and pack up their stuff and move into a van.
Right, which is exactly what I'm doing. Yeah, I'm actually very very much anti-establishment.
Sure, you don't want to be held down by the man, if you will, the system.
Yes.
You have found a freedom inside of society. It's a topic on this podcast that happens a lot. It's still being in the society, but not being of society.
Yes, I think that really that's kind of summarizes it.
And now you're sacrificing some of your freedom to teach others how to be in this society, but not of this society, so they can gain their freedom.
Yes.
Another big topic that comes up on this podcast often is books. I'm a big reader. It sounds like you're a reader as well. I have an episode coming up where I prescribe my top 5 books for anyone that wants to go on the spiritual path and kind of fast track it, But I got to ask you, have you read any good books lately, Bob?
I just recently read a book that was just so powerful for me. It was called "Rich Christians in an Age of Poverty." Boy, it was powerful. He just went through what the Bible has to say, beginning to end, and he's a Christian, and he's pro-church, and he is as gentle as he possibly can be. But there's just if you'll read the Bible honestly, I would recommend everyone read it. Every Christian should be required to read it, and and everyone should read it. It's what the Bible has to say about taking care of the poor and taking care of each other is just endless, beginning to end.
Okay.
You must be familiar with the year of Jubilee. Every 50 years, this never happened. The Jews never once kept this when they went into Palestine, as far as we know. It never once happened. Well, but the way God set it up is they distributed the land as fairly as they could to every person who came out of Egypt and into Palestine. And they owned the land. They could do anything with it. They could trade it. They could sell it. They could lose it. They could gamble it away. I mean, they could do anything they wanted. It was theirs. But every 50 years, it returned to the original owner. So if I leased it after 40 years, I knew this was a 10-year lease. If I leased it on the 49th year, I was only going to get that land for 1 year, and then it was going back to that person. The point was, you could never accumulate wealth, because every 50 years the wealth was lost and returned to the original owner. Money could not in the Judaic system end up all in the hands of a few. If you did that every 50 years, the land returned to the original owners, and everyone had an equal share, and their children, because money of them would be dead by then. Accumulating wealth is anti-biblical. So I'll stop there.
Well,
a little trip off the side.
Yeah, well, the Bible it's like a great novel, and there's, secrets to it. There's decoding that needs to happen to truly understand it. I like to study Kabbalah sometimes, in the Zohar, the Hasidic Jews. But it's interesting how they break down the stories, and the stories in the Bible are, they're breaking it down metaphorically, and how there's meanings underneath, where some people just take it all literal,
Well, that is really the question. What do you take literal and what do you take figurative?
Right.
Jesus clearly said, if your eye offend thee, pluck it out, and if your hand offend thee, cut it off. Right. I don't see that happening very often, because everyone takes that to be figurative. But when he said talked about a lake of fire, that had to be literal. There was a literal lake of fire. Well, I think they got them backwards.
Well, it's interesting that people take it so literal. I had someone just the other day tell me that she thought the end of the world is coming because of Revelations. She's like, have you read Revelations? This is happening and that is happening, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, there's also a dragon in Revelations. It says an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its head. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that it might devour her child the moment he was born, etc., etc., etc. So, there's meaning behind that dragon. It's not a literal big red dragon. It's so metaphorical. There's layers to it, and a lot of it is astrological too. Very much so.
Oh, yeah.
So we don't know how much is true and whatnot, but there are real teachings in there. That's for sure.
Stuff to live your life by.
Absolutely. Speaking of that, as we wrap this up, what's your plan for the next 10 to 15 years? Again, you're coming up on 65. You don't want a house. You don't want an apartment. You're happy in the van. You're happy being a nomad. You're satisfied. That's a big word. Satisfied. Content with 1 + 1 = 3. But, physics are physics and reality is reality, and you're only going to get older. Do you have any sort of plan, or is it just day by day?
I do have a plan. My work is everything to me, and I do consider it work. One of my favorite quotes out of the AA literature says that every day is the day we have to carry a vision of God's will into all of our activities, saying to ourselves many times throughout the day, not my will, but thy will be done. And that is what I live my life by. That I don't carry rules. I carry a vision of God's will for me.
Right.
And it's not like anyone else's vision. It could not be like anyone else's vision. It's all individual. And I think God's vision for me is the work I'm doing. And I want to, and I don't know how it's going to ebb and flow, but I'm getting older, and it's critically important that it outlast me. And so that's what I see as my vision for the moment, is making sure that what I'm doing outlasts me. And so I started a nonprofit, Homes on Wheels Alliance, and it's set up under all the rules of a 501c3. We are a 501c3.
Yeah.
There's a board of directors. They make all the decisions. I'm kind of the visionary, but that's all.
Right.
And I'm a board member. I get one vote. They're completely independent. So I've created this thing which will outlast me, my work. I want my YouTube channel to outlast me. I want to find someone who I can bring on as a partner, and that they will, when I will slowly do less, I'm going to get older, I'm going to run out of strength and energy, and I'm going to slow down, and I'm going to die. I am going to die, dying right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want that to go on without me. I don't want that just to die. I don't want my work to be for nothing. So I always have it in mind to find the person that the vision wants to take over for me. So that's my immediate goal, and then to do less and less, and retire and slow down, and do less and less. Never stop, but do less and less. That's kind of my vision for the moment.
Right. As long as we got internet, Bob, you're gonna last. So people are gonna be helped, and they're gonna say, "Who's this older guy with the Santa Claus beard, and he's talking about pooping in his van? Who is this guy?" And people are gonna discover you 20 years from now.
I hope so. That's my goal, and but for it not to be ancient history, but to be alive and well. And so that really is my goal.
Yeah, and van life is a great way to gain freedom, and slowly but surely it's happening.
Something we have not talked about along those lines is I am devoted to science. Everything I do, if I can't find science must not I just read a book by the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama has a book out about how if in any way, shape, or form science disproves Buddhism, you immediately drop that part of Buddhism.
Mm.
The Dalai Lama is a man of science, and
Yes.
He talks about he's gone all over the world and talked to the greatest scientific thinkers, and it all, to my mind, it all aligns and is flowing together in ways we could never have imagined. So, and I won't go into the details. So I'm a 100% believer in science, and science has made it extraordinarily clear. It's an absolute scientific certainty, as much as anything can be, that there is a climate catastrophe coming quicker than we will ever have known. And the desert Southwest is going to become uninhabitable. You just aren't going to be able to live here. There's not going to be any water, for one thing. We depend too much on the Colorado River, and that's just not going to work anymore. It's going to be too hot. There's not going to be any water. It's going to be uninhabitable. South Florida is going to become uninhabitable. Sea level rise, and some of it will be underwater, but the majority of it will become uninhabitable because it's a sandstone sandbar, and the seawater is going to infiltrate into the fresh water, and there won't be anything to drink.
Right.
The coasts are essentially going to become uninhabitable. We are going to become a nation of nomads. Probably not in my lifetime, but within the next 50 years, next 100 years, it's an absolute. And so part of my work is to prepare for that. At the moment, is calling out those who need it, not because of climate catastrophe. Biodiversity disaster is coming upon us in ways we can't even imagine. I could go on and on about the science of biodiversity disaster. It's coming. And we're not going to do it. We could. The argument is, can we do anything about it? The optimists say yes. The realists say no. But the fact is, we won't do anything about it until it's too late. Then we'll start trying, and then it'll be too late. It's coming. We're all going to be nomads. We're going to become nomads. We're going to become climate refugees. And so a nomadic way of life is going to become the norm, like it was for the first 2 million years of human and pre-human history.
Do you think that van life will be a great way to do that nomad life, or will we run out of fuel and it will be irrelevant?
We're all going to be on the move. we're going to leave all these regions of the country that are uninhabitable. We're all going to be moving north, where the climate will be better, more, and won't require. We're going to stop using fossil fuels. We're just going to stop. What few we have to burn some, but for some things, plastics and so on. But who knows? I have no idea what the future is going to shake out like. People a lot smarter than me that are going to figure that out. But it's going to be nothing like it is now. Capitalism will become reviled for what it is, a horror to the earth and to humanity. Socialism and communism aren't options; they're just failures. I don't know what the future will be, but it won't. It will be very different than it is today.
Maybe there won't be government.
That's the way it always worked in the past. The first 2 million years worked really, really well, and it was always at the extreme local level, and very egalitarian. There were no votes. One guy was just the wisest, and then everyone kept asking him what he thought, and then they started doing it. But that one who was the wisest, or that group who were the wisest, this is the way all primitive peoples lived. The elders were always the wisest. They were always listened to, revered. There are lots of Neanderthal graves with very old men, very, very sick men. People who they found a Neanderthal grave. His jaw was gone. He couldn't eat. The Neanderthals had chewed his food. He was old. It had been healed for years, decades. And his tribe chewed his food and gave it to him. That's how he lived. That's the way humans have always lived. And we're going to do that again, whatever form it'll take.
So currently, getting in a van and living a nomadic life could psychologically prepare us for this if we're younger and we're going to overlap into this.
Absolutely. And not very far away. We're just at the beginning now with all the natural disasters, and the real hardcore changes are to come. And what the natural disasters we're facing now, we will look back in 10, 20, 30 years and think, boy, those were the good old days. And it's just one after another, and it's going to become worse. That's what the science says. It's not my idea. I'm not bringing it up. That's what the science says.
Right. So I gotta get in my van, Bob. I gotta make this happen.
I think so. And I don't talk about this much. You should do it because you'll be happier.
Right.
You'll be healthier. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, you will be healthier.
Yeah. My thought personally is to do part-time first, and to be able to go to ashrams and monasteries but not be stuck there.
Yes.
So I can go there for a month, and then I can come back to regular city life, and I can go back and forth. And also Bob, too, I for me anyway, the social aspect.
Yes.
So if I want to visit a friend in New York, I'm in Hartford, Connecticut. If I want to go 2.5 hours to New York to visit a friend, right now I got to think too much. Well, I got to get a hotel. If I have a vehicle, basically a hotel on wheels, an office on wheels.
Yeah.
That makes being social a lot easier to travel.
It does.
Someone.
And what most of us find is that stress falls away, and and what makes American life so miserable is the constant replaying of the tapes in our head, the last argument with the boss, the last fight with the wife, the teachers at school who are struggling with my children. Those tapes play in our head nonstop. And once you kind of break away from that, those tapes can stop playing, and you can start listening to your heart and to the real, true you. And then when I find you and I come together, then if the tapes aren't playing in your head and the tapes aren't playing in my head, we can actually hear each other. I can actually hear what you're saying and feel what I'm seeing on your face and in your heart. And then you and I can bond in ways that you will never have bonded with another human being before, because the tapes keep playing.
Right. Very well said. If somebody's already familiar with you and they listen to this, are they ready for this, Bob? I don't...
Well, it comes out a little bit here and there. Yeah, no, it's
They should
Again,
sit down.
I'm going to start doing this on a channel, and so it's my goal to get this out there. I think
Good.
these things are as important as how to poop in a bucket, and I want to get
Sure thing.
death is coming, and
Oh yeah, for all of
it's
us.
here any day, and so today's the day to get ready.
Today's the day to get ready. I love it. Okay, Bob, where can they find you on social media so they can come see your work and come say hello?
Oh, this is actually where Casey should answer. I'm Cheap RV Living on YouTube. I'm Cheap RV Living on Facebook, and I think Instagram, and my website, cheaprvliving.com. That's Cheap RV Living, and you'll find me.
And your website is full of tons of information.
It is. Everything I know is on my website.
Well, it's been just a true pleasure to talk with you and get to know you better. On the next Peace Pod, I have Santos Bonacci coming on. And of course, he's the great mystery school teacher, a syncretist, and he's going to break down a lot of secrets in the world, things you never knew, so we can gain even more inner peace and liberation. So we're going from Bob Wells to Santos Bonacci. This is just unbelievable, heavy, and liberating stuff, and I'm so grateful to be in this position to talk to these beautiful people. If you're looking for my work, my seminars, my webinars, my books, more podcast episodes, go to my hub, which is drreese.com. That's doctor spelled out, and I'll talk to you on the next episode.
Thanks for listening to Inner Peace with Dr. Reese. If this episode opened your heart, feel free to share on social media and tell your loved ones. Also, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, may peace be with you.